be screwed, feel my own adrenaline. Yeah, I do just what I do, and I hope you let me in, yeah.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 7th part of, What If Harry Potter Meets My Little Pony? Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of tkepner on fanfictionnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Ponies began filing into the lieutenant colonel's office at the guard post, interrupting Harry's study of the plans. The lieutenant colonel explained the issue at hoof. So, pull out your clothes and we'll see what Harry Potter has to say about them, she concluded. Harry immediately noticed that they were all unicorns. It kind of made sense. Pegasi couldn't fly without their wings, and earth ponies, while exceptionally strong, would still be at a disadvantage. At least unicorns could still cast magic, even if it was weaker than normal, as Twilight had discovered with the few test spells she had cast yesterday. 2 of the 10 ponies had business suits that were acceptable. Unfortunately, the scouts who had them were mares and the suits were not appropriate for them. They swapped with 2 of the stallions. 3 of the clothing sets would be good for fancy dress dinner parties in Cambridge, but completely out of place in Little Whinging. 2 were evening suits and, again, unsuitable for everyday wear in Little Whinging. 1 set was beachwear. The final dress was perfect for a casual upper-middle-class woman, what Petunia would have considered appropriate for normal housewife wear in public. Fortunately, Rarity had brought along the issue of Vogue and Harry was able to quickly point out several acceptable combinations for casual or business casual in Little Whinging and most of London. Or at least, what he thought would be appropriate based on what he had overheard and seen his aunt gossiping about. With Twilight's help, Rarity retrieved several bolts of cloth and her sewing supplies, and they set off to the portal with several additional seamstresses. Any alterations would be made on the other side where she could actually see both the clothes, the pony person they were to fit, and what she needed to tell the other seamstresses to do to accomplish that. The area around the portal was even busier, if that was possible, than the path to it and at the guard post. There was already a large clearing around the portal tree, and unicorns and earth ponies were removing tree stumps while the armored and working Pegasi flew cover overhead and trimmed branches from trees still standing. The beginnings of a wooden platform around the base of the tree was in place, protecting the roots while ensuring that rainwater reached the tree and kept it alive. Obviously, the pony forest experts were unsure of how the tree affected the portal, so they were not going to take any risks to its health. Soldiers of all 3 tribes patrolled the perimeter. Rarity, at first, spent her time on the preparation platform on Equestria's side of the portal, fashioning sandals for the mares and altering their clothes. This last was especially important for the mares. The concept of melons being up front and so prominent caught the mares by surprise. Rarity was thrilled at the prospect of fashioning clothes that took advantage of a feature normally completely ignored in pony society. Harry was rather surprised at how big the variation was in that respect for the mares. Pinkie Pie was remarkably normal while Fluttershy, like Applejack, was surprisingly large. Rainbow Dash was the smallest of the group in that respect, but was by no means what people would call flat. For the stallions, Rarity made sandals but put covers over them to make them look like shoes. As long as you didn't actually look at them, they passed inspection. And, compared to the mares, their clothes were simple, a few alterations to make them fit better, remove some of the fancier details, and the 4 stallions were good to go. This required a lot of back and forth traffic through the portal, though, because they were unsure if casting magic on the earth side would attract attention. Fortunately, magic cast on the equestrian side carried through to the earth side. One thing that Harry had forgotten to mention to the adults was that human hair colors were very bland by comparison, and Twilight hadn't known any better. Fortunately, for the Unicorn Scouts this was not a problem as they used a simple color change spell to make their hair either brown or black. Twilight took care of Applejack, Pinkie Pie, and Fluttershy. Rainbow Dash refused. Harry interrupted before the argument could get too loud, "Excuse me. But there are some people who dye their hair various colors. While Rainbow Dash's is unusual, it isn't impossible. People will just think she's rebelling against her parents or something. One person with a weird hair color is not that unusual, but a whole group will attract a lot of attention." For some reason, Pinkie Pie's spell failed after only a few minutes. They just had to hope it wouldn't make them that much more noticeable. Twilight did have a different question for Harry: where did those glasses come from? "Oh, I've always worn glasses. I can only clearly see things when they're close. But you can see just fine in Equestria." "Actually, I can see better in Equestria than I can hear with glasses." Applejack bumped the Ollicorn before the new project could completely capture her attention. "Twilight, focus." "Oh." Twilight blushed. "Of course." She looked at Harry, "But we should have your eyes checked here when we have a chance, to make sure the prescription is accurate. We wouldn't want to send you to Hogwarts with the wrong glasses. Not to mention getting those broken frames fixed." Harry and the Fillies spent the rest of the day in the playpark showing the main six and the Scouts how to walk and maintain their balance. The Scouts, it seemed, had been practicing walking on their hind legs for a year, now, and quickly adapted to their new forms. They found the playpark's swings, slides, and climbing bars especially interesting and useful in practicing with their new hands and learning to keep their balance. Fortunately, no one noticed that none of the women or girls had ever heard of underwear, except in the vaguest of terms from Harry. Harry was impressed with how quickly they were all adapting, much faster than the Fillies had. Even the main six seemed to cope well. Running without tripping over nothing might be a problem for them for a while, but he didn't expect them to try to outrun any monsters or villains in this world anytime soon. It would take a few more days of practice before they were comfortable with their new forms, but they were not so awkward as to draw undue attention. The parents and children who saw them thought it was wonderful how those well-dressed parents still took the time to play with their children, pretending to clumsiness to let the kids win at the games they played walking and running around the park. A few parents even came over to compliment them on this, which the respective Scouts graciously, but confusedly, accepted. Naturally, they did not correct the perceptions of those parents. The Scouts did mention to those parents that they were new to the area and looking to purchase homes. They asked if the parents knew of any that might be for sale, or whose owners were considering selling, as well as the location of any stores or other businesses that the parents could recommend. Harry and the Fillies were quite exhausted by the time sundown approached and they headed back through the portal. Half the Scouts, in teams of 2, started exploring Little Whinging and wandering up and down the streets to familiarize themselves with the location. The other half returned to the portal and set up a small perimeter around it to watch for predators or any curious humans who might stumble across them. Harry was amazed the next morning at seeing how much the soldiers had done. Apparently, the construction crews had worked through the night. Most of the trees at the edge of the road were gone and the foundations for the 2 ever-free forest walls were well in progress. A crew was installing a tall wooden picket fence between the now cleared frontage of the ever-free forest and the paved road they were walking on. The former guard building now had a sign adorning it, "Portal Check-In," and a gate beside it and across the path leading to the portal. Harry could see the construction crews laying the foundation for a much larger building to sit astride the path and over the gate. The guard at the gate ushered them inside where Lieutenant Colonel Shining Charge once again greeted them. "Good morning, ladies. I trust you had a good night," she said, looking as if she certainly had done so. Harry suspected she hadn't slept at all considering all the work she was supervising. "Prince Blueblood should be here soon with the funds the princesses have provided for you. My understanding is that you shall be attempting to retain the services of a lawyer to assist us in acquiring the land around the portal." "Yes," said Twilight, "that's right." Harry noticed that behind the lieutenant colonel and tacked to the wall was the map from yesterday. It now had various lines in different colors drawn on it. The colors probably indicated the current state of progress on those sections. A guard came trotting in. "Sir," he said, saluting, "Prince Blueblood's chariot has been sighted and he should be here in a moment." The lieutenant colonel returned the salute and the guard trotted back out. Harry discovered a new map as he propped himself against the table. It was of little whinging, or at least the streets nearest the portal. The Unicorn Scouts must have drawn it. He quickly located Wisteria Walk and Magnolia Crescent on either side of Privet Drive. His eyes were drawn to number 4. The Dursleys were probably still there. "Is that it?" asked Apple Bloom, looking between him and where he was staring. "Huh," he said, looking over at her. Scootaloo was beside her and Sweetie Belle was on his other side. "Your relatives. The ones you never talk about. Is that where they live? What makes you think that? You're shivering." He hadn't noticed, but he was. Red-faced in embarrassment at that, he looked back at the map. "Yes," he whispered. "That one. Number 4. He waved his hoof vaguely at the map. The 3 fillies carefully examined the map, then looked at each other and nodded. He sighed. "Look, girls, don't go there. Don't do anything. They don't deserve your attention. The worst thing you can do to them is ignore them, so, just, ignore them." He looked at the small outline of a building with a number 4 on it. "Yeah. Ignore them." His longing for revenge was still there, but if he never saw them again, it would be too soon. And if he did see them? Well, he had learned quite few magical tricks in Equestria. Some, he knew, Twilight would disapprove of him knowing, much less using. She kept saying he was a good colt. Sometimes, he wasn't so sure. The former narrow path leading from the guard post to the portal was now a level graded track of packed sand easily wide enough for the 10 ponies to walk side by side down it. There were clear signs that the raw dirt bordering it on both sides was seeded with grass. Small green shoots poked up already, earth pony magic at work, quickening plant growth. Construction crews at several places along the path were installing paving stones on the packed sand. The path would be paved by evening, based on the speed at which they were working. Other crews were working on the walls, grounds, and remaining trees. He could also see the bunkers, trenches, and evacuation tunnels they were digging for concealed attack positions bordering the path. Harry could tell that by the time they were finished the entire area between the walls would look like a carefully groomed park, without a sign that any pony on the path would be under constant surveillance. Its history as a part of the dangerous wild ever-free forest would be just that, history. Instead, it would have a completely different danger but only to foes of Equestria. A series of stakes driven into the ground across the path delineated the foundations for the walls separating the immediate portal area from the rest of the construction. There was a second checkpoint there. Harry could see that the ground around the portal had been contoured so that the tree was centered in a wide raised area at least 200 paces, about 30 celestials, in diameter. Grass already poked up on it. A 4-pony wide wooden deck with a waist-high railing spiraled once around the portal. Any pony approaching the portal had to walk completely around the tree, making their presence obvious to the guards watching it. Similarly, anyone leaving would be clearly visible to all the guards. Or would immediately attract their attention by repeatedly leaping or flying over the railing. Moreover, the wood decking would make sneaking impossible for earth ponies and most unicorns by amplifying the noise of their hoof steps. Flying Pegasi would give themselves away with their wing noise. The trees in the area around the portal had been considerably thinned to improve the guards' lines of sight. Enough remained to project the ambience of a park instead of a killing field. The guards' bunkers would be unnoticeable as slight ripples and rock outcroppings. At regular intervals, except where interrupted by still-standing trees, were very high poles as tall as the trees themselves. Harry wondered what they were for. Construction ponies were still working on the unfinished spiraling deck leading to the portal. To one side of the tree at the top of the spiral was a wooden preparation platform that gave the group room to stop and loosely drape their dresses and other clothes about themselves. Then, one at a time, the guards stepped through, followed by the main 6, Harry, and finally the fillies. The other side of the portal was a surprise. Harry stumbled slightly at the sudden change in his balance, and grabbed the handrail that was right there. He kept walking, running his hand along the rail more for reassurance than actual support, as he looked around. He was in a large tent. On this side, too, a wooden deck to protect the tree's roots had been built. In front of him were the mares, now women, arranging their clothes to a better fit, some in highly inappropriate manners considering the stallions, men, standing around them adjusting their clothes for a better fit. Some of the women were removing everything and starting over, not just adjusting the belts and shoulder straps. All of the guards were removing the straps from the large soft cases they had worn as saddlebags in Equestria's side of the portal. They would now carry them by hand. By design, they looked like standard briefcases but with softer corners. Originally, the main six had wanted to bring their formal saddlebags. Harry had been able to convince them that most adults in England did not wear rucksacks, and instead they carried briefcases. Harry knew there would be more than a little grumbling over having to use their hands for such a mundane chore. Especially with Applejack carrying the two briefcases that held the gold and gems. Those things were heavy. Not that Applejack seemed to notice. Harry moved off the short path and pulled his trousers up to fit properly, tucking his shirt tail into place. He'd carried his mostly empty rucksack in his mouth. He spit out the strap and slung it over his shoulder. He watched the fillies come through the portal. They were quite used to walking irked now, and the transition only caused them a short stumble, just as it had Harry, and none of them fell. They had little to change with their sundresses except to shake their shoulders and make sure to place the straps in positions that were more comfortable. Prince Blueblood, surprising Harry, seemed to be coping well. Based on what little he had overheard, Blueblood was a bit of a blighter. Rude, insufferable, insulting, and obnoxious were only some of the nicer things Harry had overheard the mares call him over the last year. The unicorn had a bored and exasperated expression as Rarity fussed over him as if she were at fault that the clothes didn't perfectly fit after coming through the portal. Because he was to be the ambassador, he had the fanciest of the clothes, a full suit made of the finest cloth available in Equestria. The mares' dresses were almost as formal. Their guards were neatly dressed, but more casual. The problem came when he tried to walk. It wasn't that he had any great difficulty. It was just that he walked as if something was wrong with his legs, stiff and slightly uncoordinated, just like the scouts and the main six had started out yesterday. It detracted from the dignified image they wanted him to project. Unfortunately, they didn't have 7 or 8 hours to run him through the drills the scouts and mares had used to acclimate themselves to their new mode of walking. Harry thought a moment. "Twilight," he said. "I think Prince Blueblood needs a cane. It'll help him walk and look more dignified." "A cane?" "Yeah. A piece of wood that reaches just above his waist. There's a knob or handle on top that he holds, and he uses it to keep his balance and to lean on if he needs the support." At Twilight's request, a scout brought in a branch. With a little trial and error, and several trips through the portal to use her magic, Twilight changed it to end up with a smooth, polished piece of wood with an angled handle at the top. The tip had a small piece of RBB to provide traction on slick surfaces. Blueblood had insisted she decorate the handle with an image of Celestia on one side and Luna on the other. Prince Blueblood quickly adapted to the cane. Why this wasn't arranged before Hoof, I don't know. He glared at Twilight as if it were her fault. When she looked down flushing slightly, he surreptitiously winked at Harry and nodded. Harry almost fell over. It was an act. Outside the tent was another shock. While all the trees around the portal remained, a certain amount of trimming had taken place, as well as the ground contoured. It all looked natural, thanks to the skills of the earth ponies, but was radically changed from what Harry and the fillies had come to know. The guards had carefully trimmed the surrounding trees to allow more light to reach the ground. The additional light explained the presence of the soft carpet of grass that had replaced the forest debris normally scattered around the portal tree. Staring around carefully as he waited for the every pony else to get ready, he spotted what could only be a defensive position a few yards away. Two trees were close together and a large tree had apparently fallen, so that it formed a barrier at an angle through the trees at about waist high. It ran over 50 feet behind the tent. Below the trunk was a mound of dirt filling the gap between it and the forest floor. It was only when a guard moved that Harry realized he was leaning against the trunk. When Harry looked away and then back, he found it quite difficult to find the guard again, even though he knew where he was. He thought chameleon magic must be in use. As he carefully looked around, he could see that fallen trees and fortuitous placements of large mounds blocked off access to the other side of the tree portal. The only access to the portal was from the tent side, and that was restricted to one direction. A scout led the group to the nearby roadway separating Little Whinging from the playpark and woods. Considering most parents and children would be at the playpark and not watching the road, people were less likely to notice the group of equestrians exiting the woods there. Their trip to Little Whinging city center was unremarkable. While they were more formally dressed than the residents were, the mid-morning meant most people were at work or off running errands. And because most unicorns, like earth ponies, walked virtually everywhere they went, their walk was brisk and easy. The walk also allowed Prince Blueblood to adjust a bit to his cane. They did have to drag Twilight away from her analysis of the tarmac that was a modern road instead of the cobblestones used in Equestria. Harry finally stopped the flood of questions on where the material came from, how it was treated, how they managed to make it so smooth, and so forth, by saying, "Twilight. There are entire books on the subject." The rest of the walk was quiet except for occasional exclamations at the cars and lorries they saw, which all the equestrians watched carefully whenever one went by. Harry was sure their intense study of each made the drivers a bit uncomfortable. City Center was a bit of a lark, consisting of a single street of a dozen or so businesses, much like Ponyville. There was a Waitrose supermarket and some smaller shops, several restaurants, banks, charity shops, a post office, a number of estate agents, solicitors, betting shops, an insurance broker, and 2 public houses. The architecture was completely different from what the equestrians were used to, not to mention the constant flow of lorries and cars. The zebra crossing was another innovation to them. The traffic in Canterlot and the other cities wasn't zooming along at high speed as the cars and lorries seemed to be doing. That is, the normal limited in-town cruising speeds for cars and lorries was the equivalent of a full-fledged run by most ponies. It took a concerted effort by Applejack, Rainbow Dash, and Rarity to keep both Twilight and Pinkie Pie out of the various shops they passed. Blueblood rolled his eyes, but kept quiet. He was above that sort of behavior. His job was to be aristocratic. He could do that much more easily than Twilight, who acted more like the overenthusiastic bookworm than the near-goddess Alicorn that she was. The first solicitor they found specialized in personal injuries and accidents, so they quickly left. The second specialized in employment law and wills. The third they found by accident. Harry happened to glance up a side street as they walked along High Street looking for the next solicitor's sign. The sign he saw read, Conveyancing Services, Yuesher and Fuxiao, Solicitors. Which sounded like exactly what they wanted. Solicitor Lin Yuesher, Esquire, looked at the odd group in his office. His gaze lingered on Pinkie Pie's very pink hair and Rainbow Dash's spread of colors. Their clothes appeared to make them upper middle class. Applejack's undersized Stetson hat seemed to throw him off a bit. He barely noticed Apple Bloom's pink bow. "So," he said softly, "you wish me to procure on your behalf as many properties as possible, centered on the playpark at the end of Magnolia Road?" He cut his eyes to the open briefcases on his desk, one with gold ingots and the other with gems. "After converting these items to pounds because you have no bank accounts or other funds available?" Twilight nodded happily, "Precisely." He stared at them a moment longer, then tilted his head from side to side, peering at their clothes and out the 2 windows in his corner office. "All right," he finally said, "where's the camera?" The equestrians exchanged puzzled glances except Pinkie Pie. She suddenly held up a camera. "Right here," she said, as a brilliant purple flash filled the room. "Gah! Pinkie!" Twilight said severely, amid the grumbling of the others. Prince Blueblood gave her an intense disapproving glare. Pinky ignored them, of course, and handed the solicitor the photograph ejected from her camera. Harry put his hand over his eyes. The camera, while normal for Equestria, looked like something out of a 1930s film. By Earth standards, it was an antique. Except it delivered instant pictures. Blinking at the spots that now edged his vision, just as they did for the equestrians, the solicitor said, "I mean the telly, for the prank show you're filming." He glanced at the picture in his hand and dropped it on the desktop. He gestured at the briefcases. "There's no way anyone would walk around with a briefcase of gold. It's far too heavy for a man, much less a woman, to casually carry. The top layer is probably lead with gold paint and everything below it is plastic. And those gems are probably all glass." He looked intently at Twilight. No one in their right mind walks around with several £1,000,000 in gems without a massive security detail. Prince Blueblood stiffened, as he looked down his nose at the solicitor. "I assure you that both the gold and the gems are genuine. Both came directly from the castle vaults." His refined and cultured accent marked him as definitely an aristocrat. He leaned over and slammed the briefcase's lids closed. "Take us to a jeweler. That will prove it." He glanced at Twilight, who was nodding in agreement. Lynn studied him carefully for a moment. The man, introduced simply as Blue BLD, had been looking down his nose at Lynn during the entire meeting, saying nothing, but his bearing was very much that of an aristocrat. And Harry knew that while it was traditional in British and Chinese families for the men to be in charge, it was clear that Twilight was calling the shots in spite of her obvious youth. The fact that Blueblood had glanced at her after his announcement and checked for her approval proved it, if anyone was watching. Which the solicitor was. "All right, let's do that." He reached over, closed the lid, and secured it with the odd buckle it used. He grabbed the handle of the briefcase with the gold ingots. Harry could see that the solicitor thought Twilight was bluffing. The man stared, stunned, when he could barely get the briefcase to stand on end. Applejack sked, and took the briefcase from him, lifting it with only a minor strain. Then she closed the other briefcase and picked it up. Pinky was in a corner of the office doing arm bends with a barbell with weights that had the numbers 40 stamped on them. Seeing that Lynn was staring at her, she dropped them to the floor with a resounding wham. That indicated the numbers were not fake. He gave the other equestrians an outraged look, then turned back to Pinkie Pie. His lips were tight and Harry could see he was about to tear into Pinky for damaging his office floor. What he saw, though, was nothing except Pinkie Pie smiling innocently at him. No barbells, no damaged floor. He stared, frowning for a moment at where the barbell had hit the floor. With a puzzled look he stepped around his desk and led them into the reception room. "Judy, I'll be back in 15 minutes. The jeweler picked up the phone and dialed. "Good morning, Charles, what's the current rate for gold? And the discount?" "Thanks. I'll explain later." He hung up the phone and looked up at his friend. The equestrian stared. The thought that information was so easily acquired through such a small device was overwhelming. It was one thing to hear about such a device, and another to see it in action. In addition, he had said he was calling an associate in London, a distance that they knew was over a day's round trip away for non-Pegasi in Equestria. And even the fastest Pegasus excluding Rainbow Dash, of course would take at least an hour, if not two, to make that same round trip. The convenience of such quick communications, as well as the business and military aspects of it in getting things done, was not lost on any of them. "I'm not an assayer, Lynn, but these," the jeweler waved his hand at the dozen ingots on his counter and the briefcase beside them, "appear to be 24-karat gold. The current rate, with discount, is £200 a troy ounce. These ingots are 1 1/8 ounces, an unusual size, so that makes them," he turned to a calculator and punched the buttons, £225 each. "And there are 1,066, bringing the total to £240,750. He sighed and took off his glasses. He pulled out a cloth from behind the counter and started cleaning the lenses. I can't buy them all, I simply don't have the funding, but I'll take 10 of these for £2,250. The rest you'll have to take to the gold bullion company. By including the discount rate, he protected himself in case the ingots were not as pure as he thought. Not to mention that he avoided any transportation costs that normally applied. He looked over at the other briefcase. These gems are of unusually high quality. And I estimate that you have over £20 million worth in the briefcase, assuming they are all of the same quality as the ones I examined. He separated 20 diamonds from the handful of gems he had examined. I can give you £20,000 for these. The rest you'll have to take to G.F. Williams unless you want to tote them around and sell them individually. Twilight looked at Applejack. Applejack shrugged. She turned back to the stunned-looking solicitor. That sounds reasonable to me, she said. We do need some immediate spending money, so what would be the best way to do this? Lynn blinked slowly, thinking. I think that we need 2 checks, James. One for the gems and one for the ingots. He turned back to Twilight. We'll cash the smaller check and open an account with the other. Back in his office, Lynn handed Twilight 22 100 notes, and one 50 PND note. Before she could take the bundle, though, Pinky popped up beside them and grabbed it. Smiling broadly, she tucked it into her hair. Twilight rolled her eyes, but didn't say anything. The solicitor, on the other hand, stared at Pinky, trying to figure out how she had done that. I will set up your business account with the other check later this morning. And this afternoon I'll see about selling the remaining gems and gold, the solicitor said, still staring at Pinky, who was now wandering around the office and peering behind the pictures on the wall. With luck, I'll have that all finished by supper and can start on acquiring the properties you longing. Good, said Twilight. We need a place to live immediately, so I thought we could offer the 3 houses closest to the playpark double their value if we can move in immediately. The owners must move out immediately, taking their personal possessions, of course, but leaving the furniture. They have to move out by Sunday evening. We'll pay all expenses, of course, until they find a new home. Lynn stared at her. I'm not sure we can process the sale that fast. And I'm not sure we'll find any takers, either. Not on such short notice. She shrugged, then offered triple to the first one to agree. You can go to quadruple if you feel it's necessary. We need a house to occupy on Monday. Getting the paperwork isn't nearly as important a rush, as long as we are physically in the house on Monday. All right, he said. If I can get the gems processed fast enough, I'll offer the owners the extra amount in cash. Excellent. Twilight wriggled happily in place. Now for the next part. She nodded at the aristocrat beside her. Prince Blueblood is the ambassador for our home country, Equestria, to the United Kingdom. We need you to tell us how we can establish diplomatic relations. She smiled broadly. He stared at her dumbfounded. Prince? Ambassador? He turned his stare to the Blueblood. He sat down in his chair behind his desk and just stared blankly at the wall behind them. After a moment's silence, Twilight? I think you broke him, said Applejack. Pinky giggled and the Fillies and Harry exchanged amused looks. Pinky held up a paper bag and twisted closed the opening. Then she blew into the bag and made it bulge. She held it in one hand while getting ready to pop the bag with her other hand. The solicitor shook his head and called out the open office door. Judy. Come here a moment. Pinky gave him a disappointed look and dropped the paper bag. Yes, sir, came the quick answer as the brunette stepped into the office. He pointed at the ingot-laden briefcase beside Applejack. Take that briefcase to the Gold Bullion Company in London. Do not let it out of your sight. It has 1,056 24-karat gold ingots. Do not leave without a check or verified deposit. The current rate with discount is £200 per troy ounce. The ingots are 1 1/8 ounces each. You can expect approximately £237,600. If it is less than that by 2,000 or more, call me. Have them wire transfer it to this account, if possible. He quickly copied the information from the bank form and gave it to her. And call Midland Security, have them send an armored lorry for you as soon as possible, with 2 extra guards as an SCRT. Offer a bonus if they get here before 10. He turned back to Twilight. In the interests of speed, I'll transfer the funds for the gems to our corporate account, here, instead of your new account, as Judy will with the ingots. Later, I'll transfer the remaining gem money over. That way we don't have to worry about someone at the bank slowing things down because of such rapid activity in a new account. She and Blue Blood nodded their agreement. Eyes wide, the secretary just nodded as she took the paper. She walked over to Applejack, reached for the briefcase, and then failed to lift it even an inch. It did wobble slightly as she leaned back down against it in reaction to its failure to move. Have the guards move it for you, Judy. Numbly, she said, yes, sir, staring in surprise at the immovable object. Applejack chuckled. Here, let me move it to by the door. With only a little strain, she picked up the briefcase and set it in the reception area by the door, and out of their immediate way. The secretary stared, amazed. Got a bit of muscle to her, doesn't she? Judy said in a low voice. Harry laughed. You should see her hauling a wagon load of apples by herself. Makes it look like she's pulling a kid's wagon. The solicitor and the secretary turned and stared at Harry in bewildered disbelief. Why would a woman be pulling a wagon by herself? That's my sister, said Apple Bloom proudly as she picked up the briefcase of gems with both hands, struggling, and moved it opposite to the ingots. Lynn stared at the girl. He knew how heavy that case was. He'd tried to move it on James' counter and it had barely budged. Harry knew it had to weigh at least as much as the little filly did, which, if he hadn't known her earth pony strength, would have stunned him, too. The secretary stepped back to her desk and started dialing the security company. When she was done with that call, she would call the bullion company and warn them she was on her way with a significant amount of gold to exchange. The solicitor shook his head slightly, as if to clear his thoughts. He spoke slowly. First, I will have to conduct a bit of research into that field. Even with my associate, Mr. Zhao Fuxiao, doing the conveyances, it will take several days. And I have current clients that I cannot put off. Twilight exchanged looks with Blue Blood. He raised an eyebrow. She shrugged. She turned back to Lynn. The property is of higher priority right now, so that will have to do. He paused, then said, I'll also need to see your bona fides. I've never heard of this country of yours, Equestria. And I wonder why you can't do money transfers from your banks to ours instead of dealing with gold and gems. Not that it really matters if you prefer to do business this way instead. That's a bit of a story. I think we'll need to show you before you'll believe us. It's not far, I assure you. All right, Lynn said, standing up. Give me a moment to retrieve my car and I'll follow yours. Twilight looked at him, puzzled. We don't have a car. We walked. The solicitor stared at her. If James hadn't assured me the ingots and gems were real, I'd think you were trying to prank me. Prince Blueblood spoke up. I believe we should first get our financial arrangements in order, he said fussily. Once those are settled, and the initial houses purchased, we can turn our attention to establishing an embassy. Today, Mr. Uesher can get the gems appraised and sold. Tomorrow, he can come to the play park at the end of Magnolia Road and we can establish our bona fides, as he put it. Excellent suggestion, Blue Blood. Is that acceptable, Mr. Uesher? Asked Twilight. He nodded. Harry suspected that with the amount of pounds the equestrians were handing around the solicitor, he could easily put up with their eccentricities. And even if they were pranking him, the 4 gold ingots they had given him would more than pay for his time today and tomorrow. Judy, he said, call Midland back and tell them to send 2 armored lorries. I need to make a trip to G.F. Williams in London with this other briefcase. The equestrians spent the rest of the morning exploring Little Whinging's businesses, including an 11:20 a.m. viewing of Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves in the Little Whinging Cinemas. Thelma and Louise followed it at 2:05 p.m. Cultural differences aside, to say they were stunned at the experience was an understatement. They had missed lunch, but had gorged themselves on popcorn, candy, and sodas, instead. Dinner was back in Equestria at the Apple Bloom's home. "Hey, Sweetie Belle," Harry said after they had helped clear the table and do the dishes, "do you know that gem-finding spell your sister uses?" "Yeah. Well, I was thinking, maybe we could dig up a few gems before it gets dark." "You heard how much the jeweler said the briefcase was worth." "I thought that maybe we could dig up a dozen or so and trade them in for spending money of our own. We'd probably only get 100 bits or so each to last all year at the school, but it'd be our bits to spend on what we want." "Oh. That's a great idea. Ice cream whenever we want." "Yes." Scootaloo pumped her foreleg in anticipation. It wasn't that simple, unfortunately. Wielding a shovel with your mouth was hard. And while Harry could levitate a shovel, slamming it into the ground was another story entirely. Even using his magic just to hold the shovel steady was a trial. He bashed himself in the face more than once when the shovel wobbled as he jumped his forehooves on the shovel spade. 2 hours of spell casting and digging later, they had 15 small gems barely as big as the ones the equestrians had given the solicitor to sell. "Well, this is disappointing," said Apple Bloom. "Just a bunch of small gems." Said Scootaloo. "If they're as nice as the others from the royal vault, we'll still get a couple of 100 or so bits for all of them." "I'd take even 50 bits, Harry said. "It's better than nothing." He had never had any money he could call his own. Sweetie Belle sighed, "Guess we should head on home, then, it's getting dark." She started walking back towards Sweet Apple Acres. Just as they reached the edge of the field they had been scanning, Harry said, "Hey, just for luck, how about one more time?" The unicorn filly sighed, but closed her eyes and built the spell in her mind before releasing it and looking around for any telltale glows. To her amazement, she saw a very bright spot just barely into the tree lean beside her. "Hey, look," called Apple Bloom, pointing at another spot behind Sweetie Belle that was just as bright. Based on how bright they were, the 4 ponies figured they had found 2 huge groups of gems. A few minutes of digging later, they had 2 large rocks sitting in front of them. "Those don't look like gems to me," Scootaloo said, discouraged. Sweetie Belle snorted. "Give them a good stomp, Apple Bloom." Shrugging, Apple Bloom reared up and slammed her hooves on the larger of the 2. There was a loud crack, and the stone fractured. A second slam of her hoof, and it shattered to reveal 4 purple gems, each as large as one of their hooves. Sweetie Belle laughed. "Rarity is always telling me about finding bunches of gems inside hollow rocks. Sometimes it's lots of little gems, which she prefers, sometimes it isn't." A repeat performance on the smaller rock yielded 3 large red gems. That gave them a total of 7 large red/purple gems and 15 small gems. The 7 big ones were almost as big as their hooves. With the 7 big ones in hoof, they were happy with their haul. Harry was especially happy about not having to ask Twilight for spending bits. After a bath in the big tub in the barn and miracle of miracles, no tree sap was involved. They were ready for a sleepover in Apple Bloom's room. As planned, Lynn showed up at 8 in the morning at the park. Harry and the fillies were playing on the climbing bars where it seemed the fillies were deliberately trying to put Harry in the position of looking up their dresses. The fact that they hadn't underwear to wear, yet, made the situation all that more embarrassing for him. As ponies, fillies and mares didn't seem to care about keeping their privates covered at all times with their tails, it was the colts and stallions who got all flustered and upset should their sheaths fail to hide their privates adequately. Some mares, and some fillies, tried to get those failures to take place as often as possible, enjoying both the stallion's discomfort and the thrill at seeing what normally was carefully hidden. And laughing at the stallion's failure to control themselves. In Equestria, Harry had gotten used to seeing things like that and usually ignored it as much as his filly friends did. If he accidentally saw the filly's privates, so what? Just so long as he kept himself under control and in sheath, things were fine. And the fillies were his friends, so they didn't play such mean games. It was different, for some reason, now that they were girls. He found himself blushing and looking away. Which they found funny. And led them to create more of those situations. In some ways, it would have been better if they had not been wearing clothes at all. Anyway, he noticed Twilight walking over to meet the solicitor, followed by 2 transformed guards and Applejack. Rarity had stayed back in Equestria making notes on the fashions she had seen the day before. Dash was stretching my wings, as she put it. She had really hated not flying yesterday. Pinky was baking and Fluttershy was, well, being Fluttershy hiding with her animal friends. "Hey, fillies, he's here," Harry said. They dropped back to the ground and the herd started walking over to intercept the adults. They were, after all, the most expert at using the portal. And Harry, being a person from Earth, would have the best chance of keeping the man calm when he first saw Equestria. "I sold the gems to G.F. Williams, provisionally, for £30 million. The exact amount will depend upon the results of the gems' actual valuations." Considering it was Friday afternoon, they expected to complete the valuations by Tuesday. They did ask me where these gems originated. I told them that my client had acquired them over many years and was now liquidating their holdings. They did advance me a bank check for £1 million, which I added to your business account at Barclays. I kept out $500,000 for conveyances this weekend. And I secured your first property at 11 Magnolia Road yesterday evening. The woman who opened the door was the stereotypical English old lady, a tall, thin woman of between 65 and 70 years of age. She had white snowy hair, pale blue eyes, and a pinkish wrinkled face with a welcoming smile. "Good evening," the man at the door said. "I am Linwesher, Esquire, a conveyance solicitor. Are you, perchance, Miss Marple?" He smiled as he held out his card. She narrowed her eyes for a moment. "Why, yes, I am." She took the card and glanced at it briefly. "Excellent. I have a client interested in purchasing this property. Might we discuss this?" She looked him up and down, then glanced at his car parked at the street side. "I am sorry, but I'm not interested in selling at this point in time." She started to close her door. "Excuse me, but there is one more thing," he said, quietly. "My client is willing to pay you a premium of £43,000. She stopped and stared at him. "I am really not interested at the moment." "Cash." "Immediately." She studied him a bit longer, then slowly opened her door wider. "Thank you for your time," he said, stepping inside. She backed up. "Would you like some tea?" "Yes, please." "Please make yourself at home," she said warmly, waving her arm at the sitting room. "Thank you," he said, again, as she bustled off into the kitchen. Sitting, he noticed the pair of knitting needles placed on the end table with the basket of yarn skeins beside it. A partially completed something was at the end of the needles. A few minutes later, Miss Marple returned with a tray and tea setting. Once they were settled, the solicitor started. "My client wishes a home beside the playpark," he nodded his head in that direction, "and wishes to close the sale as quickly as possible. For that reason, I can offer you a premium of £43,000 on top of the market price for a house in this neighborhood, which should be about £43,000, or this house's assessed value plus 10%, whichever is higher. The premium will be paid upon signing of the sales contract." He held out 2 stapled contracts. She took them and gave each a quick read. "The premium is offered on a separate contract to prevent the artificial inflation of housing prices in the neighborhood," he explained. She sat down her tea on the end table, leaned back, and took a breath. "I will need to discuss this with my nephew, Raymond," she said. "And a solicitor," he added, "I would suggest." She nodded. "It will probably take me a few days to decide." He smiled. "There is one more thing. If you sign the contract tonight, I can increase the premium to 86,000. She stared at him. He shrugged, my client wishes to expedite the sale as much as possible. He paused, then added, why don't you ring up your nephew and lawyer and have them come over? Any consultation fees they might charge as consultants will be added to the sale price. My nephew lives too far to come tonight, she said, standing up and going over to the phone stand by the stairs. If the lawyer can come over, we can consult your nephew by phone, then, he suggested. Half an hour later, the solicitor, Henry James, III, put down the contracts. It looks fairly straightforward to me, Miss Marple. He smiled at the spinster. And I've known Mr. Uesher for several years, so this is on the up and up. The gray-haired lady nodded and went back to the phone to consult her nephew. Are we agreed, then, said Henry, a few minutes later, looking at both Miss Marple and Lynn. Market value plus 10% or £43,000, whichever is greater, and a premium of £86,000. At Miss Marple's nod, Lynn said, there is one more thing. If you can move out before Sunday evening, taking your personal possessions and leaving non-heirloom furniture, I can increase the premium to £130,000. My client will, of course, provide, at their expense, movers and storage for the things you cannot take with you immediately. Another half hour of discussions went by with no conclusions, until Lynn said, there is one more thing. My client will provide £20,000 for temporary housing until you are situated in your new home. All in cash. The other solicitor leaned back and said, how and when do you intend to deliver the cash? He arched an eyebrow in query. Excuse me, said Lynn, I'll be right back. 2 minutes later, he laid a second briefcase on the coffee table. He opened it, removed 5 bundles of 100 PND notes, and put them in his briefcase. 150,000 in 100 PND notes. Or, if you prefer, he said, I can give you a combination of pounds and check. With Mr. James' assistance, I could even establish a trust fund to reduce your tax burden. They signed the contracts 5 minutes later. One more thing, Lynn said, handing the other solicitor 2 final forms. These are non-disclosure agreements for both of you that you will not discuss anything we have talked about for a PRD of 1 year. He smiled at the still surprised woman. You may tell your neighbors that you have been thinking of taking an extended 6-month vacation, and your nephew suggested some friends to house sit for you while you were gone. That explains your storing of personal effects. You could even take a 6-month world cruise on the Queen Elizabeth II with the stipend and still have funds for temporary housing when you returned and began your search for a new domicile. You can say your rush is because you were on standby for a room on the QE2 and only received confirmation today. He smiled. According to my sources, they have several cabins available at the moment. My client can provide the funds to fly you to the QE2's next port of call if you would like. And today she will spend packing with the help of movers I have contracted. For an extra £8,000, she was more than willing to vacate today instead of tomorrow. I anticipate the house to be ready for you to move into tomorrow morning, afternoon at the latest. I expect the paperwork will be completed and filed by Friday, next. I've retained the services of 2 interns to assist me in this. Today they will start canvassing the rest of the nearby houses. They are telling everyone they approach that part of the conveyance is a contract of non-disclosure both during and after the sale, for a PRD of 1 year. The penalty is the return of the 50% premium and the 6-month living stipend we are offering. That will help restrain gossip from inflating property values while we are working. I believe we will be able to purchase most of the houses in the area you requested by the end of the week. The biggest single expenditure will be for the farm that surrounds the playpark, which I hope to close this afternoon. Twilight was grinning broadly. Oh, thank you so much, Mr. Uesher. That's wonderful news. His explanation had taken most of their walk to the portal. He stopped on seeing the tent. A guard stepped from behind a tree. Princess Twilight Sparkle, he said, saluting. Everything is ready. Twilight sighed. You don't need to salute, I've told everyone that before. Yes, Your Highness. She rolled her eyes. The solicitor, meanwhile, was staring at the other three people he could see, all women, who were similarly saluting. Because he knew where to look, Harry could see two other guards who were almost invisible against the tree barricades on either side of the tent. They were keeping their eyes on the surroundings. The solicitor turned to Twilight, frowning. First, Prince Blue BLD and now Princess Twilight Sparkle. He cleared his throat. Princess. Twilight blushed. She looked down at the ground for a moment, embarrassed, before looking up again. As I told you yesterday, Mr. Uesher, we aren't from here. I mean that literally. We are from another world. I am one of 4 pony princesses in that world. Princess Celestia and Princess Luna are co-rulers of Equestria. Princess Mi Amore Cadenza is the ruler of the Crystal Empire. She looked down at the ground, embarrassed. I only recently became a princess, just 2 months ago. She sighed. Mr. Uesher was frowning as he listened. Harry was positive he didn't believe her. Harry Potter, she nodded at him, and the fillies, discovered the portal between our worlds when he accidentally fell through it. It took us over a year to find it again. And then it was by another accident. Harry, however, she glared at him, frowning, knew exactly where it was and used it many times. The solicitor looked at Harry and the fillies. I think I would have heard about a strange child being found in the forest, he said dubiously. Twilight smiled. Oh, no, Mr. Uesher, you have it backwards. Harry fell from this world into ours. He stared. Now, I know that's not right. A child disappearing from Little Whinging would have made the front page of the newspapers. Not to mention constables would have been all over the town. I couldn't have missed that. He stared at them disapprovingly. Harry sighed. No, you wouldn't have known at all. My aunt and uncle, the Dursleys, would never have reported me missing. Someone might have found me and returned me to them, he said bitterly. It was their fondest hope that someday I would simply disappear. That they could pretend that I had never been there and that they never knew me. They even told me that if a stranger offered me candy and wanted me to accompany him, I should gratefully accept. Twilight stepped close and put her arm around Harry, followed by the fillies hugging him. Mr. Dursley. He has a son named Dudley, as I recall, not Harry Potter. Yes, he's tried very hard to keep my existence a secret. They frequently pretended I didn't live with them. If you were to send the constables to 4 Privet Drive and look in the cupboard under the stairs, I imagine you'll learn all you need to know. Or you could just ask Dudley about Harry hunting. Harry started to scowl. And how much fun it was, he snarled, turning and looking away. The solicitor had an unreadable expression, Harry saw from the corners of his eyes. That was something else we wanted you to look into, Mr. Uesher, Twilight interrupted. About getting guardianship away from the Dursleys and to some pony more suitable. She shook her head sadly. The solicitor noticed how the 3 girls all crowded close to Harry with Scootaloo and Apple Bloom each holding one of his hands in theirs while Sweetie Belle gently rubbed his back. But that's for the future. First, we need to get an embassy established, and for us to do that, we need to prove to you we aren't pulling a prank. So, Twilight made a gesture at the tent, if you'll follow me. She started towards the tent. Lynn looked at 4 youngsters for a moment before following Twilight. Now, she said, as one of the guards, a woman, held open the tent flap, Harry and the fillies have made this trip many times, that's why I have them here with us. They are the experts, she concluded with a narrow-eyed glare at them. The fillies grinned happily at the praise. Harry wasn't nearly as pleased, knowing sarcasm when he heard it, and still scowling over his relatives. She stepped inside and moved to the left to allow the solicitor to come in. It was a large tent and could easily hold several dozen or more people at once. What was astonishing to the solicitor, Harry could see from the way he stared, was that the tent had several trees growing right through its canvas roof without any signs of flaps or other opening to explain how it had been accomplished. The tent was empty except for 2 men standing on either side of the tree at the end of the tent. There was a wooden ramp with a railing starting about 6 feet from the tree and leading to it. Harry followed behind the man and moved to step up beside him, as he had rehearsed. The fillies followed. He cleared his throat, facing the man. "It's completely safe," he said. "When you step into it there's a flash of light and you see wood on either side of you, then you're out of the portal. You'll stumble a bit, it's disorientating the first time, much less so later." The guards built a platform and ramp on the other side. He looked at the solicitor intently. "The other side looks like a park with wooden trails right now, it's still under construction. It used to be a right thick forest." He took a deep breath. "The biggest difference you'll notice is that the colors are all brighter there, more vibrant. Almost cartoonish, in fact. And the sounds are more distinct. And the air. The air is much cleaner. It's easy to get distracted. So, watch your step. The changes might even make you stumble and fall. Don't worry about falling, there's special ponies, people, who will catch you. That's their job right now, helping you adjust as you come through the portal." Harry quickly started towards the tree, the fillies staying to the side and watching. He turned around and walked backwards. "Just walk normally. There's a little sign on the tree." He jerked his fist over his shoulder, his thumb pointing at the tree. "It says, 'Welcome to Sweet Apple Acres.' That's where we're going, the name of the place, that is." He stopped when he was almost at the tree. He waved the solicitor, now at the foot of the ramp, closer. "Just follow me, it's perfectly safe, I promise." He turned and stepped through the portal. Harry clomped down on all fours and kicked his human sandals to one side. He rapidly ran forward a few steps, to get out of the way. "He's coming through now," he called out to the 2 unicorns standing on the ramp on either side of the portal. They had debated telling him about turning into a pony, but thought that he might have balked at coming through the portal. This way was more abrupt, but they hoped that knowing that Harry had turned back into a human on the other side would keep him calm. If not, they could simply step back through with Twilight levitating him. Harry stared, stunned, at what came through the portal. It was the solicitor, Lynn Uesher, Esquire, without a doubt. The shock was he was still a human. The man towered over them all. The head of the tallest of the unicorn guards barely reached his waist. The colt's head barely reached halfway up his thighs, his withers just below the man's knees. Harry had never considered the height difference, not really. Practicing walking on 2 legs with the fillies hadn't prepared him for actually seeing a human looming over him. Lynn stared about himself, eyes wide in his own shock. Yes, after seeing Harry disappear into what looked like a solid tree, he had expected to see what Harry had described. What he hadn't expected was to see a score of miniature technicolor horses arranged around an elevated wooden deck and boardwalk. Not to mention that several of them were flying. And when he looked farther away, he could see dozens more, perhaps even hundreds, of the ponies working on a massive wall, maneuvering and lifting blocks of stone the size of his office with little trouble. Harry managed to choke out, "You need to move, Mr. Uesher, so Twilight and the others can come through." In a much louder voice he said, "This is Mr. Uesher, the solicitor that Twilight has hired to help us on the other side." The guards moved back as the man took a few hesitant steps forward. Lynn had no trouble singling Harry out, he was the only horse wearing the clothes Harry had been wearing on the other side. That the colt was almost lost in them wasn't much of an impediment to that recognition. And he recognized the voice. "See? It's just like I said, isn't it?" Harry continued. Now that he had started, it seemed harder to stop. "The colors are all brighter, aren't they? Almost like what you see in cartoons on the telly." He jumped up onto his hind legs, making him almost as tall as he had been on the other side of the portal. He started walking backwards. "There don't seem to be as many fine details, though, right?" Harry was rambling and he knew it, but until Twilight or another adult took over, he didn't want the solicitor frightened by what he saw. "And the air smells so much better, doesn't it?" He had made about 3 steps before he tangled his legs in his trousers and fell. Fortunately, one of the unicorn guards saw and caught Harry in his magic. Watching a glow surround the colt and stop him in the midst of a fall brought Lynn to a complete halt. Not worried about falling, and now held up in the air by a magic, Harry said, "Oh, we didn't think you would believe us if we told we could do magic." He rubbed his mane with one hoof. Then kicked his hind legs a few times and managed to get the trousers to fall to the ground. "Well, at least the unicorns can. Those are the ponies with the horns. The ones that fly are Pegasi." Lynn nodded slowly. Behind the solicitor, Harry heard Twilight gasp after she came through the portal. "Oh. My. Celestia. You're still a person." Harry turned into a pony, "But you didn't." "Now why is that?" "Let me see." A soft purple glow encased the solicitor for a moment, and then vanished as Twilight gasped. "You have no magic." Lynn turned sideways to look at Twilight. The ponies around them all started and stared at the human. The guards knew better than to say anything, they just watched carefully. There were more gasps from behind Usher as the others came through the portal. The unicorn who had caught Harry had lowered him to the wooden boardwalk by then. The colt took a quick look to the left and right. There were a dozen guards on either side a short distance from the boardwalk, but these guards had fancier gold armor that was so polished they practically shone. That gave Harry pause. These weren't just royal guards, these were royal guards. A horrible suspicion flitted into his mind. Slowly, he turned his head to look behind himself. Yep. There she was. Seated calmly at a large table to one side of the wooden boardwalk, the railing removed to allow ponies to approach it easily. Without a thought, he crouched low behind the solicitor's legs. Twilight had felt his rapid teleport. She looked down from her study of Lynn Usher's non-presence in the magic around them. She frowned at Harry. She had told him many times that he had remarkably sensitive self-preservation instincts, much more so than any pony she had ever met. Which made it all the more confusing when he seemed to ignore them completely and go off to do something that bordered on suicidal with the other cutie mark crusaders. She sighed and looked around to see what had set off the tetchy colt this time. "Princess Celestia," she cried out in surprise. She teleported over to her beloved teacher. "You didn't tell me you would be here. When did you arrive?" "If I had known you were here, I would have made sure we got here as soon as possible." She gasped loudly, crouching backward slightly. "I've kept you waiting." "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm such a terrible student." Twilight was well on her way to a full-blown panic, already strands of hair had started to appear poking out of her mane at odd angles. "Calm yourself, Twilight," Celestia said kindly, her voice like a melody. "I've been enjoying a few minutes of quiet contemplation without any nobles, courtiers, or bureaucrats pestering me. It is rare that I get time to commune with the world outside Canterlot like this. I thank you for the opportunity." She inclined her head gracefully. Twilight took a step back. "Thank me," she said, bewildered. She glanced around the large restful-looking park-like clearing with scattered trees. "Oh. I see," she hesitantly added after a moment, not seeing at all what her mentor meant. Meanwhile, Lynn had noticed both Harry's movement and Twilight's reaction. And the magnificent white horse seated at a nearby table, sipping tea from a floating cup. "She's appealing," he murmured. "That's Princess Celestia," Harry said quietly. "She's the co-ruler of Equestria." "I see. And why are you hiding behind me?" he said as he glanced down. The three fillies had walked up and gathered around the two. Their expressions were ones of awe as they stared at their ruler. "Because she scares the PSS out of me," Harry said bluntly. "She's a goddess, with a capital G, she's over 2,000 years old and she raises and lowers the sun every day. She once banished her sister to the moon for 1,000 years. Literally. No exaggeration." He crouched lower. "And you think I can protect you?" Incredulity tinged the solicitor's tone. "Nope, but you're bigger than me." And out of sight, out of mind. If she's busy looking at you, she's not looking at me. And she wants to meet you. Lynn glanced at the fillies. And your friends? They're ponies, Harry said dismissively. She wouldn't dream of hurting one of her ponies. I'm not. I'm a pretend pony. I'm a person who masquerades as a pony. Applejack sighed behind him, exasperated. Harry, you know she likes you. She thinks of you as one of her little ponies, just like us. And you know she wouldn't hurt you. Harry glanced up at Applejack. Not on purpose she wouldn't. He shivered. But if she had to choose between you or me, I think we all know who would lose. Applejack sighed. She looked up at the solicitor. Please excuse Harry. He has a problem with authority figures. His experiences with adults on the other side have left a deep impression. The more influential someone is, the less he trusts them to do the right thing by him. She sighed again. And his first meeting with Princess Celestia was rather traumatic, through no pony's fault. And painful, added Harry. That was your own fault, Harry. Honestly, trying to run through a wall. 2 walls, put in Scootaloo. Almost made it, too, she said admiringly. She scared me. Harry said defensively. Still does. He shivered and looked back at the royal. Mr. Linuesher, Esquire, they heard Princess Celestia say, her voice clear across the distance, but she wasn't speaking much louder than she had been to Twilight. Would you care to join us for a cup of tea? Address her as Your Highness or Princess Celestia, Harry said urgently. Only speak when she expects an answer. Do not interrupt. Pretend you're having tea with the Queen and there's a trigger-happy soldier with an M16 pointed at your head standing beside her, Harry said rapidly as he quickly scooted backwards. He did not say, good luck or, it's been nice knowing you, although he was thinking it really loudly. I think I'll tell every pony on the other side that things are fine here and that Princess Celestia is holding court by, he said, hurriedly as he backed through the portal. Applejack sighed and just looked at the fillies. They shrugged. Sweetie Belle gathered Harry's discarded shoes and trousers. Come on, fillies, let's see what trouble Harry's into now. Scootaloo giggled and said, besides being naked in front of all those mares turned human. Sweetie Belle snickered. Apple Bloom snorted. He's probably already at that play park hiding under a bush. And he's always telling us not to go through the portal naked, added Scootaloo as she shook her head. They disappeared through the portal. It was almost mid-morning, less than an hour since Harry fled Equestria. Harry and his 3 girlfriends sat on the pavement on the forest side of the street and watched the movers at 11 Magnolia Road work. It was rather boring, truth be told, because the movers spent most of their time helping the little old lady pack inside the house. As a result, the 4 spent their time staring at an empty garden with a lorry parked in the garage drive. And watched the occasional car drive by. Phew, said Apple Bloom, those things really stink when you're up close to them. She waved a hand in front of her face and wrinkled her nose in disgust. Yeah, Harry said, but they sure beat walking long distances. Then he saw someone he had hoped to avoid. Ah shite, he said under his breath. The fillies looked where he was looking. Coming down the street towards them were his cousin and his friends. Dudley had a big leer on his face and his friends were chuckling at something he had said. Well, he said as he came closer, what do we have here? He frowned as Harry stood up, the girls doing the same a moment later. I thought you died when you disappeared so sudden-like. Any report of my death was an exaggeration, Harry said dryly. After a moment to mull that over, Dudley continued, Mum and Dad will be so disappointed. I don't think they'll let you inside. Harry shrugged. Not gonna ask, anyway. So, why you here? A sick smile briefly appeared. Wanna try another round of Harry hunting? Harry stared back at him, wondering if removing the bully's ears would make him any uglier. He'd gotten quite good with his cutting spell. Lots of practice with Timberwolves tended to increase both one's accuracy and stamina in casting. Something in his expression unsettled Dudley. So, who are the birds? He nodded his head at the three fillies. Friends of mine. You got friends? He frowned, then smiled. Figures a poofed her like you would only have girlfriends. His two mates leered at the girls. Harry shrugged again. It was at times like this that he was acutely aware that he was shorter than anyone else his age. That here on Earth, in fact, all three girls were almost a head taller than he was. He rolled his neck. The fillies watched and listened in great puzzlement. That this was the infamous Dudley Dursley was not in doubt. He was a bully, just like Diamond Tiara, except he seemed, somehow, more of a predator. And after the last year with Harry, the cutie mark crusaders knew how to deal with predators. Scootaloo dropped behind Harry and the other two girls and looked around for signs of other dangers. Sweetie Belle rolled her neck and shoulders and faced the bigger bully with Harry. Apple Bloom took a slightly wider stance, twisted her feet side to side, flexed her fingers, and narrowed her eyes at the two others with Dudley. What would have happened next, Harry wasn't sure, but he was prepared. Is there a problem here? A woman in business attire had appeared beside them. Harry recognized her as one of the Royal Scouts. Dudley smiled awkwardly. Oh, no problem, ma'am. Just saying hello. Only Harry and the fillies noticed the slight glow coming from just into the hairline above the scout's forehead. The other two boys straightened and smiled as well. None of the boys fooled the hard-eyed woman staring at them. And they knew it. Dudley was the first to break. Well, I guess we'll be going. He turned and walked back up the street. See you later, you dumb Burke, he called over his shoulder. The transformed guard watched until the trio was out of sight. Are you all right? Yes, ma'am, the four chorused. Perhaps you should return to our camp. Ah, was the disappointed reply from them all. Watching what little activity there was on a Saturday morning in Little Whinging was vastly more entertaining than sitting in a guard camp watching the trees grow. But they dutifully followed her back anyway. They arrived at the camp just as the solicitor came out of the portal tent. He looked more than a little stunned at all he had seen. He looked at Harry, and said, barely loud enough for them to hear, she made the sun move in a figure 8. He looked off into the distance. Then her sister just appeared. She pulled the moon up and they orbited each other. Then they chased each other. The two princesses seemed to quite enjoy themselves. Harry nodded glumly. Yep. Told you she moves the sun. And her sister moves the moon at night. Mr. Usher just looked at him, then shook his head as if to clear his thoughts. Twilight came up to them, still fiddling with the straps on her dress, her purse floating beside her. He tilted his head slightly. And magic is real. He took a deep breath. As I said, I'll get right on the embassy paperwork, and making sure I get as much of the surrounding land as I can for you, princess, he said to her as he politely nodded his head. Twilight sighed. Just call me Twilight, please. Of course, he murmured. By your leave, princess, he nodded again, and slowly walked away towards the playpark, his forehead creased in thought. Twilight sighed and looked over to one of the guards, who swiftly nodded, and started to follow the man. Now that he was fully briefed, they didn't want anything to happen to him. In his current dazed condition, he might walk in front of one of those car things, without noticing, and get hurt. Harry and the fillies spent the rest of their day back in Equestria. But only after Twilight had assured Harry that Princess Celestia had returned to Canterlot. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 8. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author tkepner on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.